The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the freshly mowed lawn as Amara Johnson turned the key to her new front door for the very first time. A smile spread across her face as she stepped inside, the smell of fresh paint and new beginnings filling her lungs. After 15 years of dedicated service to the county sheriff's department, she had finally achieved one of her biggest dreams, owning a home in the prestigious Oak Ridge Heights community. "Welcome home, Sheriff," she whispered to herself, setting down the small box of personal items she'd brought for her first night. The rest of her belongings would arrive tomorrow with the moving truck, but tonight was about savoring this moment of accomplishment. Amara walked through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing against hardwood floors. Each space represented a piece of her future: the dining room where she'd host holiday dinners, the study where she'd review case files, on quiet evenings the backyard where she might finally get that garden she'd always wanted. At 42, she had spent most of her adult life focused on her career, rising through the ranks with determination and exceptional leadership skills until she became the county's first black female sheriff 3 years ago. Outside her kitchen window, the sunset painted Oak Ridge Heights in warm gold. The neighborhood was everything the real estate agent had promised: immaculate landscaping, stately homes, and a sense of security that appealed to Amara's professional instincts. She noticed a couple walking their dog, stopping to chat with another neighbor watering flowers. It looked peaceful, exactly what she needed after days filled with the pressures of managing an entire county's law enforcement operations. Amara unpacked a framed photo of her parents and placed it on the kitchen counter. They had both been public servants, her father a firefighter and her mother a nurse. They hadn't lived to see her become sheriff, but their influence shaped every aspect of her commitment to community service. "I think you would have loved this place," she said to their smiling faces in the photograph. Her phone buzzed with a text from her deputy wishing her well on her first night in the new house. Amara had told very few people about the move. After years of living in the same apartment closer to downtown, she wanted a fresh start in a quieter area, somewhere she could separate her high-profile professional life from her personal one. As darkness fell, Amara sat on the floor of her empty living room, eating takeout while scrolling through a thick packet of homeowners association rules that had been left on the counter. Oak Ridge Heights HOA was known for being particularly strict, specific guidelines for everything from trash can placement to holiday decorations. She raised an eyebrow at some of the more unusual restrictions, but understood that these rules were partly why the neighborhood maintained its pristine appearance and high property values. A car slowly driving past her house caught her attention. It passed once, then returned a few minutes later, moving even slower this time. Years of law enforcement training kicked in as Amara observed the vehicle, without making it obvious she was watching. The car belonged to a middle-aged man who seemed to be taking note of her house. Probably just curious about the new neighbor, she thought, but made a mental note to keep an eye out for the same behavior in the coming days. That night, as Amara made up the air mattress that would serve as her bed until her furniture arrived, she felt both excitement and a slight uneasiness. She was one of only a handful of black homeowners in the predominantly white community, something she was well aware of from the moment she decided to buy here. While she hoped her neighbors would judge her by her character rather than her skin color, experience had taught her that wasn't always the case. Still, as she drifted off to sleep in her new home, Amara remained optimistic. Tomorrow would be the start of a new chapter, and whatever challenges came with it, she was more than prepared to face them. Little did she know that her peaceful, new beginning would soon be disrupted in ways she never could have imagined. The moving truck arrived early the next morning. Amara supervised as the movers carefully brought in her furniture, directing them with the same quiet authority she used at work. By mid-afternoon, her house was beginning to feel like home, with bookshelves filled and family photos placed throughout the rooms. A knock at the door interrupted her unpacking. Amara opened it to find a small group of neighbors standing on her porch, led by an older woman holding a basket of muffins. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Heights," the woman said with a practiced smile. "I'm Diane, the HOA Social Committee Chair. We'd like to welcome all new residents personally." Amara accepted the basket with genuine thanks. While she generally kept to herself, she understood the importance of community relationships. The neighbors introduced themselves one by one: a retired teacher, a dentist, a stay-at-home parent, all friendly if slightly formal. Their polite smiles didn't quite reach their eyes as they looked past her into the house, taking inventory of her belongings. "We have monthly neighborhood meetings," Diane explained, handing Amara a printed schedule. "And of course you've received our community guidelines. We take great pride in maintaining Oak Ridge Heights standards." Before leaving, a gray-haired man at the back of the group stepped forward. Unlike the others in their casual but expensive clothing, he wore a uniform-like outfit: khaki pants, a navy polo shirt with Oak Ridge security embroidered on the chest, and a belt that seemed designed to hold more than just pants up. "Raymond Fletcher," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "I handle neighborhood security. Been doing it for 7 years since I retired from private security work. Any concerns, day or night, you call me first." Something in his tone made Amara pause. She had met many people like Raymond during her career, civilians who craved authority without earning the badge. "Nice to meet you," she said simply, not mentioning her profession. Years of experience had taught her when to reveal her role and when to observe quietly. This was definitely a time for the latter. After the welcome committee left, Amara returned to unpacking. She hung her uniforms in the back of her closet. At home, she preferred comfortable clothes over anything that reminded her of work. Her badge and service weapon were properly secured in a safe, as they should be when off duty. Over the next few days, Amara settled into a routine. She left early for work and often returned late, sometimes not until after dark. Her schedule made it difficult to meet more neighbors, but she occasionally waved to those she passed while collecting her mail or taking evening walks. One thing became quickly apparent: Raymond Fletcher took his self-appointed role very seriously. His car, an older model sedan with a magnetic neighborhood watch sign slapped on the door, slowly patrolled the streets throughout the day. Twice, Amara spotted him taking photos of homes where garbage bins had been left out too long, or where lawn maintenance didn't meet HOA standards. "That man thinks he's running a police state," remarked an elderly neighbor who introduced himself while Amara was checking her mailbox. "Been worse lately with those break-ins a few miles over. Now he's got everyone jumping at shadows." Amara had heard about the burglaries in a nearby development at work. Property crimes were up slightly across the county, but nothing that warranted the level of paranoia Fletcher seemed to be encouraging. At the first HOA meeting, held in the community clubhouse, Amara sat quietly in the back row. She watched as Fletcher gave his security report, noting with professional interest how he used fear to build his importance. He listed suspicious persons reported in the area with descriptions that made Amara's law enforcement instincts prickle. They seemed to focus heavily on people of color walking or driving through the neighborhood. As the meeting concluded, Amara overheard Fletcher telling a small group of residents, "I've got a new system. Anyone I don't recognize after dark gets stopped and questioned. Better safe than sorry." Amara frowned. As sheriff, she knew such tactics were legally questionable at best. As a new resident who happened to be black, she recognized the potential danger. She made a mental note to have a private conversation with Fletcher soon about the limits of his authority, but her upcoming night shifts would have to delay that discussion. Little did she know that her next encounter with Raymond Fletcher would happen much sooner than planned, and under circumstances neither of them could have anticipated. The week had been especially demanding for Amara. A major case had kept her at the station late every night, reviewing evidence and coordinating with neighboring counties. By Friday evening, her eyes burned from staring at computer screens and case files. All she wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. The clock on her dashboard read 11:23 p.m. as she turned into Oak Ridge Heights. The neighborhood was quiet, most windows dark except for the occasional glow of a television or porch light. Amara had changed out of her uniform before leaving work, wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans. Her badge and gun were locked in their proper compartments in her car, as she never carried them openly when off duty. As she pulled into her driveway, she noticed a car slowly cruising past her house before parking across the street. The dome light flashed briefly as someone got out, but Amara paid little attention. She was too tired to care about nosy neighbors tonight. The autumn air felt crisp as she stepped out of her car. Fumbling with her keys, she walked to her front door, the weight of the week heavy on her shoulders. The motion sensor light she'd installed clicked on, illuminating her small porch. "Stop right there," a sharp voice called from behind. Amara turned slowly, years of training kicking in automatically. Raymond Fletcher stood at the edge of her lawn, his stance wide and confrontational. He wore his usual security-style outfit, but something was different tonight. His hand rested on what appeared to be a holstered gun at his hip. "Can I help you?" Amara asked calmly, though her mind was racing through protocols and procedures that had become second nature over 15 years in law enforcement. "Identify yourself," Fletcher demanded, taking several steps closer. "What are you doing at this residence?" Amara straightened her posture slightly. "I live here. I moved in 2 weeks ago." Fletcher's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I know everyone in this neighborhood, and I haven't approved any new residents on this street." "I wasn't aware I needed your personal approval to buy a home," Amara replied, her fatigue giving way to growing irritation. "Now, if you'll excuse me, it's been a long day." She turned back toward her door, inserting the key into the lock. "Don't you move." Fletcher's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. Amara froze, then slowly turned around. What she saw made her blood run cold. Fletcher had drawn his weapon and was pointing it directly at her. "Hands where I can see them," he ordered. The absurdity of the situation might have been almost funny if not for the very real danger. Amara raised her hands slowly, keeping them visible. Her mind calculated the distance between them, noted his poor grip on the weapon, assessed the neighbors who might be at risk if things escalated further. "Sir, I need you to lower your weapon," she said, her voice steady and authoritative despite the adrenaline now coursing through her system. "We've had break-ins reported," Fletcher said, his gun hand trembling slightly. "No one mentioned a new homeowner, especially not—" He caught himself, but Amara knew exactly what he had almost said. Lights began to flicker on in neighboring houses. A door opened down the street. This situation was getting more dangerous by the second, not just for her, but for anyone who might wander outside to investigate. "My name is Amara Johnson," she said clearly, keeping her hands visible. "I am the homeowner of 1842 Oak Ridge Lane, and I am also the sheriff of this county." Fletcher's expression shifted from aggressive to confused. "You're lying. My badge and identification are in my vehicle. I can show them to you if you lower your weapon." Fletcher hesitated, doubt creeping across his face. "Raymond," a woman's voice called from across the street. Diane from the welcome committee stood on her porch in a bathrobe. "What on earth are you doing?" More neighbors were emerging from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Fletcher's gun remained pointed at Amara, but his certainty was clearly wavering. "This is dangerous and unnecessary," Amara continued, her voice carrying to the growing audience of neighbors. "I'm going to reach for my phone very slowly. I'll call the station, and you can speak to the deputy on duty who will confirm my identity." As she spoke, a patrol car turned onto the street, its lights flashing but siren off. Standard timing for a response to this neighborhood. One of the neighbors must have called it in. Fletcher's face lost all color as the significance of what he had done began to dawn on him. The patrol car pulled up to the curb, and 2 officers stepped out cautiously, hands near their holsters, but weapons not drawn. They assessed the scene quickly, one man pointing a gun at a woman with her hands up, and several neighbors watching from their yards and porches. "Lower your weapon now," the taller officer commanded, taking position behind his open car door. Fletcher stood frozen, his gun still pointed at Amara, though his hand had begun to shake visibly. "Mr. Fletcher," Amara said calmly, "for everyone's safety, please put the gun down." The use of his name seemed to snap Fletcher back to reality. Slowly, he lowered the weapon. "Hands behind your head and kneel down," the officer instructed. Fletcher complied, his face ashen. The second officer approached carefully, secured Fletcher's weapon, and then stepped back, allowing his partner to handle the situation. "Sheriff Johnson?" the taller officer said with clear surprise, finally recognizing Amara in the porch light. "Ma'am, are you all right?" A collective gasp went through the small crowd of neighbors. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Sheriff? Did he say sheriff?" "I'm fine, Officer Thompson," Amara replied, finally lowering her hands. "There's been a misunderstanding." Officer Thompson looked from Amara to Fletcher, who was now kneeling on the grass, reality dawning on his face. "You're really the sheriff?" Fletcher asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Mr. Fletcher, I am. I've been the county sheriff for 3 years now." Diane pushed through the gathering crowd, her bathrobe tightly wrapped around her. "Raymond Fletcher, have you completely lost your mind, pointing a gun at our new neighbor?" Fletcher's face crumpled. I thought, there have been break-ins." "This isn't the first time he's been overzealous," an older man called from his driveway. "He threatened my grandson last month when he was visiting, said he didn't belong here." More neighbors began sharing similar stories, their voices overlapping in the night air. It seemed Fletcher's self-appointed security role had been causing problems long before tonight's incident. Amara turned to Officer Thompson. "I'd like a word with Mr. Fletcher privately, if possible, before any decisions are made." Thompson nodded, understanding the delicacy of the situation. He helped Fletcher to his feet and guided him toward Amara's porch, away from the increasingly agitated crowd. Under the porch light, Amara got her first good look at Fletcher's face. The man who had seemed so intimidating at the HOA meeting now looked small and frightened. His security officer persona had crumbled completely. "Do you understand the seriousness of what just happened here?" Amara asked quietly. Fletcher nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "I was just trying to protect the neighborhood. By pointing a gun at an unarmed homeowner. I didn't know. I didn't expect." He struggled to find words. "I've never seen a black sheriff before." The admission hung in the air between them. Amara let the silence stretch, knowing sometimes silence was the most effective tool in getting someone to confront their own thinking. "The thing is, Mr. Fletcher," she finally said, "I wasn't a sheriff tonight. I was just a woman trying to enter her own home after a long day at work. That gun wasn't pointed at a law enforcement officer. It was pointed at a black woman you decided didn't belong here." Fletcher's shoulders slumped further. For the first time, he seemed to truly grasp what he had done. Officer Thompson approached again. "Sheriff, do you want to press charges?" This was the question Amara had been considering since the moment Fletcher drew his weapon. As sheriff, she knew exactly what laws he had violated. As a black woman who had just had a gun pointed at her for the crime of entering her own home, she felt the weight of countless similar incidents that had ended, far worse than this one. The neighbors had gathered closer, waiting for her answer. Among them were faces showing genuine concern, others showing discomfort, and a few that seemed almost disappointed that the confrontation had been defused. Amara looked at Fletcher, then at the watching community, knowing her next words would shape not just this man's future but her relationship with the entire neighborhood. By morning, news of the incident had spread throughout Oak Ridge Heights. Amara's phone buzzed constantly with messages from concerned colleagues, reporters seeking statements, and neighbors expressing everything from genuine apologies to thinly veiled justifications for Fletcher's actions. Amara had decided not to press charges immediately. Instead, she had instructed Officers Thompson and Davis to confiscate Fletcher's weapon and issue him a stern warning. This decision wasn't made lightly, as she explained to her chief deputy over coffee in her kitchen the next morning. "I could throw the book at him," Amara said, staring into her mug. "Unlawful detention, assault with a deadly weapon, impersonating security personnel, he'd serve time." "So why didn't you?" her deputy asked, genuinely curious. Amara looked out her kitchen window at the quiet street. A few neighbors were gathered on a driveway across the way, clearly discussing last night's events. "Because putting Fletcher in jail might make me feel better for a day, but it wouldn't change anything. Not really." She turned back to her deputy. This neighborhood would just find another Fletcher, maybe one smarter enough not to pull a gun on the sheriff. The problem isn't just him, it's the environment that made him feel entitled to point a weapon at someone for simply existing in the wrong place. The HOA board called an emergency meeting for that evening. As Amara walked into the crowded community center, conversation stopped and heads turned. She recognized the power of this moment. She could either use it to heal or to divide further. Board President Thomas Wilson, a retired judge, called the meeting to order. We're here to address last night's deeply disturbing incident involving our neighborhood watch coordinator and our newest resident who, as many of you now know, is also our county sheriff. Fletcher sat in the front row, looking small and defeated. Behind him, the room was split almost visibly. Those who believed he had gone too far, and those who thought he was just doing his job, albeit overzealously. Before we begin, Wilson continued, Sheriff Johnson has asked to address the community. Amara walked to the front of the room, conscious of every eye following her. She wore her full sheriff's uniform tonight, a deliberate choice. Thank you for coming, she began, her voice steady. Last night I was held at gunpoint on my own property by someone with no legal authority to do so. This happened because assumptions were made about who belongs in this community and who doesn't. She paused, letting her words sink in. I could be standing here tonight telling you about criminal charges being filed. Instead, I want to talk about community safety. Real safety. Not the kind built on fear and suspicion. For the next 10 minutes, Amara outlined the difference between actual security measures and the dangerous vigilantism that had been allowed to flourish in Oak Ridge Heights. She explained how true community safety came from neighbors knowing and looking out for each other, not from intimidation and profiling. The neighborhood watch has its place, she acknowledged, but it's meant to be eyes and ears only, not judge, jury, and certainly not executioner. As she spoke, she noticed expressions changing around the room. Some people nodded in agreement while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few remained stone-faced, arms crossed defensively across their chests. When Amara finished, Wilson thanked her and opened the floor for discussion. What followed was 2 hours of sometimes heated debate about the role of the neighborhood watch, Fletcher's actions, and the underlying issues that had led to the confrontation. He was just protecting our property values, one homeowner insisted. By threatening people with guns? Another fired back. My kids play on these streets. Maybe if people would announce themselves properly when moving in. Someone began. Are you suggesting we need your permission to buy homes here? Interrupted a younger homeowner, one of the few other people of color in the room. The tensions that had been simmering beneath Oak Ridge Heights' perfect exterior were finally bubbling to the surface. Years of unspoken rules about who belonged and who didn't were being challenged openly for the first time. By meeting's end, the board had voted to completely disband the current Neighborhood Watch program. Fletcher himself, surprisingly, seconded the motion, his face showing what appeared to be genuine remorse. As people filed out, Amara found herself surrounded by neighbors, some apologizing, others asking questions about proper security protocols, and a few just introducing themselves properly for the first time. She drove home that night feeling both exhausted and cautiously hopeful. The community had taken its first difficult steps toward change, but the road ahead would be neither short nor easy. A week after the emergency meeting, Amara sat in her office at the sheriff's department, reviewing the official report of the incident. Her deputy had handled the paperwork, treating it like any other case despite the sheriff being the victim. The folder contained Fletcher's statement, witness accounts, and photos of his confiscated weapon. Amara closed the file with a sigh. The legal part was straightforward. Fletcher had broken several laws, but the human element was far more complicated. Her phone rang. It was Judge Wilson, the HOA board president. Sheriff Johnson, I wanted to update you. The board met again last night to discuss community safety reforms, Wilson said. And something interesting happened. Fletcher asked to address the meeting. Amara raised an eyebrow. What did he have to say? He proposed a community education program Said he'd been doing a lot of thinking about what happened and wanted to make amends in a meaningful way. This was unexpected. Amara had assumed Fletcher would retreat into bitterness or denial, as she'd seen so many times when people were confronted with their prejudices. "I'm listening," she said. "He suggested we partner with your department for proper training on community watch protocols, racial sensitivity, and the legal limits of civilian authority." Wilson paused. "He specifically asked if you would consider leading some sessions." Amara sat back in her chair, turning the idea over in her mind. It was bold, asking the very person he had threatened to help educate the community. Yet there was something genuinely transformative about the proposal. "Tell him I'll think about it," she replied. That evening, Amara returned home to find a small gathering on her front lawn. About 15 neighbors stood there, looking uncertain but determined. Diane stepped forward as Amara parked her car. "We owe you an apology," Diane said. "Not just for what Raymond did, but for not making you feel welcome from the start." An older man stepped forward. "My grandson was visiting last month when Fletcher hassled him. I didn't speak up then, and I should have." One by one, neighbors shared similar stories. Fletcher had created an atmosphere of fear that many had silently accepted, grateful it wasn't directed at them, until now. "We've organized a real welcome dinner," Diane added, "not just the obligatory muffin basket. If you're willing to, give us another chance." Amara looked at the faces around her, genuinely remorseful, awkwardly hopeful. This was the messy, imperfect reality of community building. "I appreciate that," she said simply. "I'd like that dinner." 2 days later, Amara made a decision. She drove to Fletcher's house and knocked on the door. The man who answered looked nothing like the intimidating figure who had pointed a gun at her. He appeared smaller somehow, humbled. "Sheriff Johnson," he said, clearly surprised. I heard about your proposal to the HOA board," she interrupted. "A community education program." Fletcher nodded, his eyes downcast. "It's the least I can do." "Why ask me to be involved? I could still press charges against you." Fletcher finally looked up, meeting her gaze. "Because you're the only one who can make people really understand what happened and why it was wrong. It won't mean the same coming from anyone else." Amara studied him carefully. In 15 years of law enforcement, she'd developed a good sense for genuine remorse versus self-preservation. "If we do this," she said finally, "there are conditions. First, you'll complete a proper civilian training course on community safety. Second, you'll work with my department on a county-wide program addressing racial profiling in neighborhoods. And third, this won't erase what happened. Trust has to be rebuilt over time." "I understand," Fletcher replied, "and I'm prepared to face legal consequences if that's what you decide." Amara had spent days weighing her options. The easiest path would be to let the legal system handle Fletcher, clear charges, clear consequences. But would that create lasting change in Oak Ridge Heights or just temporary fear? Would it build bridges or reinforce walls? "I'm scheduling a town hall meeting next week," she said. "Open to everyone in the county, not just Oak Ridge. We'll talk about community safety, racial profiling, and how to build neighborhoods where everyone feels secure, not just some people at the expense of others." She handed Fletcher a folder. "This is what justice looks like to me. Not just punishment, but education and growth. Read it over. If you're serious about making amends, this is where we start." As she walked back to her car, Amara felt a weight, lifting. The incident would always be part of her story in Oak Ridge Heights, but perhaps it didn't have to be the ending. Perhaps it could be the difficult beginning of something better. 6 months had passed since that night when Fletcher pointed his gun at Amara on her own doorstep. The neighborhood that had once felt so unwelcoming to her had undergone remarkable changes, though not without growing pains along the way. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Amara stood at a folding table in the Oak Ridge Heights Community Park, handing out certificates to the first graduating class of the Community Safety Alliance program. 20 neighbors of various ages and backgrounds had completed the 8-week course that she had developed with help from her department and, surprisingly, Raymond Fletcher. "Congratulations," Amara said, shaking hands with each graduate. Remember, true security comes from connection, not suspicion. Fletcher was among the graduates, though his journey had been the most difficult. After extensive discussions with Amara, he had agreed to a form of restorative justice instead of criminal charges. This included completing community service hours, surrendering his weapons permanently, and becoming deeply involved in reforming neighborhood safety practices. Sheriff Johnson, Fletcher said quietly when it was his turn to receive a certificate. I never thought I'd be standing here 6 months ago. Neither did I, Amara replied honestly. But here we are. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The town hall meeting Amara organized had been tense, with some residents resistant to acknowledging the racial bias that had fueled the incident. Others had demanded harsh punishment for Fletcher, arguing that anything less sent the wrong message. But Amara had stood firm in her belief that the incident could become a catalyst for deeper change, not just a news headline about another confrontation between a white man with a gun and a black person simply existing in a space. After the ceremony, neighbors gathered for a community potluck. Children played on the newly installed playground equipment while adults chatted in groups across the park. Amara noticed something that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago: genuine integration. People who had barely acknowledged each other before were now engaged in conversation, sharing food and making plans. Diane approached, carrying a plate of food. Your favorite from the last potluck, she said, offering Amara a piece of peach cobbler. I've been practicing. Thank you, Amara smiled. Their friendship had developed slowly but genuinely over the months. The county commissioner called me yesterday, Diane said. 3 other neighborhoods want to implement your community safety alliance program. You've started something important here. Amara watched as Fletcher sat with a young black couple who had moved into the neighborhood last month. He was explaining something about the community garden project, gesturing enthusiastically. The change in him wasn't just for show. He had done the difficult internal work of confronting his biases, though Amara knew that work was never truly finished for any of them. An older resident named Mr. Chen approached Amara. Sheriff, my grandson is visiting next weekend. He wants to meet you. Says he's thinking about law enforcement as a career now after hearing about what you did here. I'd be happy to meet him, Amara replied. As the afternoon went on, Amara found a quiet moment to sit alone on a park bench reflecting on the journey. When she had first moved to Oak Ridge Heights, she had simply wanted a peaceful place to come home to after long days at work. Instead, she had found herself at the center of a community transformation that none of them could have predicted. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. A similar incident had occurred in a neighborhood across the county. A black family had been confronted by self-appointed security while moving into their new home. But this time, the HOA president had immediately stepped in, diffused the situation, and reached out to Amara's department for guidance on implementing the Community Safety Alliance program. The ripples were spreading. As the sun began to set, neighbors helped clean up the park. Someone started playing music and a spontaneous dance broke out on the grass. Amara watched as people who had once viewed each other with suspicion now laughed together, their children playing without boundaries. Her new home had turned out to be nothing like she expected. The journey had been difficult, sometimes painful, but ultimately more rewarding than she could have imagined. What had begun with a gun pointed at her on her own doorstep had transformed into something powerful, a true community where safety came from connection rather than fear, and where belonging wasn't determined by what you looked like but by the humanity you shared.